went to UBC and still am actually finishing my degree from there right now. I lived there at UBC for a few years. I grew up in Vancouver, and when I was in grade 11, I was at school focusing on getting high enough grades to get into university, as they marketed to our high school we should do. And I was still training for piano, doing that a lot and teaching that a lot. And I was playing soccer, which I'd done my whole life, which I love and still wish I could play a lot now. And I was scouted to this competitive track team because I was a fast runner and I loved to run, and I always had done really well whenever I took part in like a track and field program at school. So I joined this track team and I was doing really well with it, and I remember it's like the spring of grade 11, and I was quite nervous around it. It was just really competitive, and I guess I was really putting a lot of my pennies in that bucket. Like I was putting a lot of my future in that, thinking that as long as I can succeed in this, and it made me really unique. Like a lot of my friends gave me praise for it too. And for the first time, I sort of rose above, I felt like I rose above just being one more person out of 300 in my grade to someone who was more distinguished. And I was feeling, wow, now I feel less apart from, and now I feel like when I run, I literally felt high too, so it gave me a social status in a way, and it made me feel really ecstatic as well. And so as I continued training, we were training every day, and I didn't really think much about the nutrition aspect of it. I just ate for training until I eventually started to lose weight through that, and I didn't really notice initially. And then some people started to point it out, and I started to notice, and it's something in my head just clicked, and I became almost addicted, I guess, to the feeling of lightheadedness I would get. We'd go, I'd go to school all day long and then go to a 2-hour track practice, and I'd purposefully not eat before just to feel that lightheadedness. And quickly I became obsessed at other times of the day about not eating enough, right? And yet as I did this and I induced upon myself this state of starvation, I was starting to lose weight. Before I had just had, I enjoyed food, but I basically ate food like how I drank water and took showers. It was just a normal part of my day that I didn't really think much about until I just used it or didn't use it to make myself feel better in a way, and make myself feel lightheaded, and make myself feel visibly thinner, I was starting to become noticeable, right? And yet as I was doing this, I actually was starting to feel less and less in control of it. I was almost becoming addicted to it. It was starting to rule my life. Before I was more into my music and my track and my school and my friends, and as I became more and more obsessed with this thing to focus on, I just lost everything else, and my grades started to slip, and soon I became so obsessed with food that I started to almost worship it, I guess. I would think about it in math class and think about it all day long, but then purposefully not eat, but then I would be so obsessed with it and worshiping it that when I gave in, I soon couldn't stop. I would want to eat more, and especially foods that were really sweet or foods that were really fatty, because my body probably needed that, but I was depriving myself and yet giving in. And then soon I felt so guilty, I would decided to, I'd purge, and then I would not eat again for 12 hours, and then I'd do it again. And when this was all going on, I was still training 7 days a week and in school. None of my friends knew about the severity of what I was putting my body through, putting my family through. This whole time, as I sunk into this addiction to disordered eating, I couldn't place my finger on how I got there, right? Because I had the best of intentions, and I never really was someone to try to be like super, super like looking like a supermodel or something. Like, I think most teenagers are kind of like that, but like I don't believe I was anything more than the average person, right? And I started to feel really shameful about like how and why I was doing this, and how and why I was so obsessed with it, and yet I hated myself for doing that, and yet I couldn't let it go. And I would try to, and as I continued on, I would hide it because I felt so shameful. And my family, I think, were concerned and scared for me, but because a lot of my behaviors involved like stealing food to binge on or refusing to eat during normal meal times, my family became very angry. And like as the months wore on, like I ended up getting kicked off that track team because I was too thin, and like my health started to deteriorate because when the behaviors I was doing really it's really hard on your heart and really hard on your electrolytes. And soon I was seeing a doctor, and by the fall of grade 12 I was much underweight in a very unhealthy way, and I was feeling very depressed emotionally. I was feeling suicidal. I was skipping school. I would wait until my family left the house so I could binge and purge, and then I would starve myself again. It's like I couldn't eat with anyone, yet I would obsess about it. And the moment I was away, it's like, thank God I'm free. Now I can give in, right? And my whole reason why I even bothered to wake up in the morning was based around that. Like, I had lost all depth to my life, and yet I couldn't understand how I was there still. Like, I had, when I was younger, even a year prior, I had, ideas of myself getting involved with other organizations my friends were, right? Like going overseas to volunteer, volunteering in Vancouver, like doing things that are, as a young person able to give back to society. And yet I couldn't, like, it's like I felt so helpless. I was like wanting so badly to be like my friends, and yet I didn't know how to get out of the state of life I had created for myself. And I must preface this with, I never imagined I would be the person I never even knew this existed before. Like, I remember doing a project on eating disorders in grade 10 and putting up Barbie dolls on a poster board and saying, those are people who are super, self-centered, who get that. They want to just look like Barbies. Like, I did not know about them at all. But within 2 years, some of my low points were being so underweight, like I don't even need to say the number, that the doctor actually was scared I was going to die in my sleep or have a heart attack, and I was forced into the hospital for a month, and I hated it. I was not ready to change. I still sought comfort through my eating disorder, and I was basically just locked up in a wheelchair in the hospital for a month, and basically had no choice but to just lay in bed and then eat 6 times a day so they could get my body weight up. But as soon as I got out of the hospital, I was just right back into it, especially my bulimia, because I realized with bulimia I could perhaps keep up maybe a bit higher of a body weight so the doctor wouldn't notice somehow, and yet still abuse myself. When I got out of the hospital, another low point for me was I didn't heal emotionally at all. I didn't heal any of the shame I had about even having an eating disorder. And when I got out, all that shame just drove me right into it. And I started to cut myself too. I would cut my hips because I thought they were fat, even though I was still so underweight. I was just so delusional about what health meant, and even what I looked physically like. I think I saw I saw myself in the mirror and I could not see what everyone else saw. My friends by that point all knew, and they're, shaking me, do you not see what you're putting yourself through? You could die. And I just couldn't see it. My family was, everyone's trying to shake me to wake to what I'm living with here. It's life-threatening, and I couldn't see it, right? Another low point was a few months later, right before I graduated high school. I was probably in the worst bout of bulimia that I had when I was throughout my eating disorder, and I was skipping school every day. I had spent all the money I had made with my own business teaching piano on like food. My families had they had to lock the cupboards. Like my younger sister had to, she couldn't even bring friends home from school because my family would never know like what precarious state I would be in. I would like hide food outside and try to sneak it into my house. Like it's like I was an addict. And then I ran out of money, and so I started shoplifting from grocery stores, and I did that probably around 10 or 15 times before I got caught. And I skipped school and got arrested for shoplifting, and I was sent to jail for like the rest of the day, and my parents had to drive across the lower mainland and come get me out of jail, and like they took my fingerprints and took like a mugshot, and that was one of my most shameful points because it sort of showed to me how I was literally like addicted to this, and I was putting this in front of like my health, in front of the law, in front of my morals, in front of everything, and yet I had absolutely no idea how to get out of it. And every time I saw a counselor or a psychologist, I would maybe be honest for 5 minutes and then start lying again because it still brought me so much comfort, and I was like, I'm going to just die this way. Like I had basically accepted that was going to be my life. So then somehow I actually graduated high school with pretty high marks. I don't even know how because I skipped like 90 days that year. And I somehow got into UBC, and I decided to choose psychology because I guess part of me thought maybe that I would magically get better when I moved on to the grand world of university, and that I could use my experience to help other people. And I kind of thought about that in like a very dreamy sense because I actually had done nothing to get better by that point, but yet I thought maybe one day I could help people. So I chose psychology. And as I entered university, I still was really kind of living in a delusion. Like I would buy nice clothes with the money that I had through my serving job at the time, and I would go to like some of my classes, and then I would go to work and come home from work and like binge at night, and then like not eat all day when I was on campus, and just I was living a very chaotic lifestyle, and my family still knew what was going on, and they thought like I shouldn't have even been in university, but I insisted that this would make me better. I thought I guess the next thing down the road would get me better. So in university, I actually did get into residence, and I moved into residence, and that for the first maybe half a year in residence, because I got in January, I got into Vanier, that initially I thought changed my life because I got in and it was like I was basically forced into like normal eating, at least because I had a roommate for the first time. I was living with other girls on the floor, and like I felt accepted there somehow. I mean, I was so nervous about it, but everyone was really nice, and like we'd all go to the cafeteria for dinner or meet for lunch, and I felt initially like I had left behind my eating disorder. Like I basically stopped starving myself, I stopped purging, I stopped binging, I stopped even obsessing, and I gained a lot of weight back, and I became like a young woman, and I kind of thought like, okay, like this is how it's going to be, like yay, like now university, I am going to move on, like I'm growing up. But I didn't really realize that probably what was really helping me do that was I had started to see someone. I had dated some people through high school on a more casual level, but like I had started to see someone who, for the first time ever, I told them like everything, like what I'm saying right now. It was such a big deal for me to actually tell someone this, and this person was still able to love me even though I had done these things, and even though that was part of who I was, right? And they still loved me, and I realized like, wow, like, you know, like I guess I became reliant in a way on like having another person love me in order not to like put my body through that destruction. And as well, another thing I think that helped me sort of relieve myself of those obsessions were like, I mean, a lot of people do it, like social drinking, right? And I never really drank in high school because I was so into like my eating disorder that I only got drunk maybe like a few times in high school. But when I got into university, you know, you start going to like the pit and the nightclubs, and I was spending beyond my means for sure, but like I felt like it was better than the alternative, you know? I felt like, okay, even though I'm drinking 4 nights a week, at least I can, you know, like not have to binge and purge every night. And like I felt like more normal, even though looking back, like that was actually the beginning of just basically transferring my addiction from one substance to another. Pretty much what happened was there was a year there where I did really well academically, and I felt like, okay, I have this nailed, right? Like I'm gonna go into grad school and actually become a psychologist, and I was doing really well. And that year was probably just like a chance sort of overlap, because I soon actually became not only just as sick with my eating disorder as I had been in high school, but also addicted to alcohol. And so I would use alcohol to help calm me around eating, because I had all these roommates. So I would try to like make a normal dinner, but I'd drink, you know, a quarter of a bottle of vodka before, so I could actually do that. And it was like I was self-medicating myself, and I was partying a lot with my friends, but more so I wouldn't even, it's like I was using alcohol in secret. Like I'd maybe order a beer with them, but then I'd be carrying around a bottle of vodka in secret in my purse, because that was my real medication. Like the whole partying scene was basically just like a cover up for what actually was going on. And my boyfriend at the time, my close roommates, many of whom actually knew me from high school, they at this point clued in, and it became, my efforts sort of transferred from school to covering up my addictions, right? And all that shame was still there, and I hadn't healed at all, and I hadn't given myself any time to actually try living life without being addicted to something. So I was attempting to like do research for UBC now. I'm in my 3rd year for the psychology department. I'm attempting to do full-time courses while I am consuming, like at my worst it was over like a 26-ounce bottle of vodka a day, while I am binging and purging up to like 3 times a day, while I am also starving myself, while I am meeting my friends for maybe lunch once a week and trying to appear like everything's all right. And I lived like that for a year. I spent way too much money. I actually had to borrow money from people, and I would steal from my roommates. I didn't steal money, but I would steal food, and I would steal alcohol. And I would hide in my room where we lived. It was like a 6-person quad where I lived for 2 years, and I would hide in my room and engage in these behaviors when my roommates were out, you know, like watching TV or studying together or making dinner together, and I would just hide, and I'd come out and try to talk and appear like everything was okay. And yet, like, my best friend who lived with me, like, she says now, looking back, everyone knew what was going on, but no one knew how to address it because I was so fragile, right? Like sometimes at night they'd hear me just like bawling in my room, and no one knew how to address it. Like they just didn't want to push me over the edge because it was pretty evident that I was getting close to that edge. Especially for me, for my alcoholism and for my bulimia in particular, I felt so shameful and I felt so disgusted with myself. And I would look at people on campus who I was friends with or I knew who were, you know, my best friend at one point, she was the president of like the solder student society, right? And we lived together that year, and she's like going to all these meetings in the Senate and all this stuff, and I'm at home downing vodka and binging and purging, and we were best friends, and we still are, but I felt so inadequate, and I felt like, how am I such a screw up, you know? And I didn't give myself a chance to just admit that everybody through their lives goes through ups and downs, and I was looking at everybody else's ups and not admitting that perhaps I'm in a down right now and I need support from other people. It was really difficult to ask for help. And I was so scared because so much of what led me into these behaviors was fear of judgment. I was so scared of that fear of judgment. So right after my third year of university at UBC, my boyfriend and I, the person I met initially when I moved into residence, who knew everything about what was going on, he and I had somehow stayed together through all of this. And there's several things I could say about that. We were both very sick, and yet we both really loved each other, but we were both addicted to different things, but we decided in our addictions, with our best thinking at the time, we thought it would be a wise idea to move in together. And I intended to go back to the job I had the previous summer, and I once again thought moving in together will be what gets me this life where I don't have to do this to myself anymore. And it was really like a brutal fall until I finally succumbed to how unmanageable my life was. I didn't even go to work past 2 weeks. He and we were barely holding on to life. Well, I'll speak for myself. I was barely holding on to my life, and I don't think he wanted to really push me into changing because we were able to enable each other and yet somehow keep up a front of normalcy to our social friends, I don't know how we did it, but I was becoming a walking human who was turning almost yellow. My eyes were often bloodshot from drinking too much or purging my food. I would stay home and binge and purge and down masses of alcohol and just purposefully put myself into a place where I would just pass out and sleep for 8 hours. I was not spending my own money. I was spending his money or stealing again. And I would wake up with tremors and bruises and just think if I can just last 45 minutes until I make it to get more alcohol, then I will survive my day, because I was scared if I didn't get it. Sometimes when I didn't have money, if I couldn't get it, it just wouldn't be good. I would shake and it would be really scared of what was going to happen to me. So I woke up one morning though, and I looked in the mirror, and I knew that we had taken it too far. I guess I don't need to give the details, I guess, but I ended up calling my parents and crying and saying I'm really I'm hurt. I can't do this anymore. I'm scared, and so they said we're coming over, and then they also said the police will be there soon as well, and that took me by surprise. And within 10 seconds after hanging up the phone, my mind went straight back to where I was before. I was like, no, I can't do this. I woke up my partner at the time and said, you need to leave because you're probably going to get arrested. You need to leave right now. Forced him basically out of the house. He was probably dazed and confused, got him out. And I was so scared though, because he was my source to alcohol, and I didn't know how to live life without him either. I was so scared of being without alcohol, without my eating disorder, and without him, right? And I basically just sat there quivering until everyone showed up, and they gave me an ultimatum, and they looked at me and were like, the police said, we're going to remove you from your apartment tomorrow and take you to the psychiatric ward if you don't go to a treatment center instead. So I didn't really know what to choose. I chose the treatment center. It was also fast that it happened, and the next morning my parents came over at 5 a.m. and took me to the ferry, and oh my gosh, I guess because up to that point I had just accepted that I was going to die of alcoholism and die of an eating disorder and just leave my family behind and just put them out of their misery, because they had tried to raise like a really functioning, loving human being, and instead I had turned out the way I had turned out. And I just thought at this point it was better for them, for me to just like leave them and let them move on and mourn me and move on. And so when I got to this treatment center, I was so like physically ill from withdrawal too, but that was like the first day of, and don't get me wrong, like it has been difficult to actually like stay in recovery and actually seek recovery. And it has been at times, like sometimes I feel like, because I have relapsed into both my eating disorder and my alcoholism since I initially like sought recovery. But being in recovery right now, I can say that like once I made a decision to actually live, even if I slip, I know that as long as I keep wanting to live, and I have built I've let people into my life now, like my friends who I actually lived with all this time at university, new friends I've made in a recovery program for alcohol addiction, right? Like many of whom have a history of eating disorders too. My family, even some of my professors, I've let all those people in as to what was really going on. And they have just said, thank goodness you're alive. We knew it was going on, but until someone wants help themselves, it's really difficult to change them. And after like 6 years, I finally knew that if I didn't seek help for myself, I was going to die for myself. Like it's not about anyone else. I needed to actually want to do it for myself. And when I got to this treatment center, I hadn't really realized that yet. Like this is sort of in retrospect, but you know, like I finally was able to confront how difficult it was for me to actually, going back to like before I even developed my eating disorder, to actually live with those feelings I've had for like a long time before I even started acting out with like physical problems. Like I have felt like even though I shouldn't feel this way, I get it, I shouldn't feel that way, I felt like more or less like kind of like inadequate, you know? And I don't know why, and there's no like one real answer. Like I know alcoholism runs in my family and this and that and society and being a female and all that, but my, you know, the brain and genetics, and there's so many reasons why. But once I can accept that it's okay to have those feelings, and even to just speak sometimes how I feel to people. And it's funny because now I can like go to my workplace and tell someone like, yeah, like sometimes I get nervous before I go to work. Like, do you feel that way? And like normal person, you know, who sits like the desk across from me is like, yeah, I feel that way sometimes too. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not alone, you know? And my whole life I felt like I was the only one who felt that way, like felt super nervous. And now it's just more about communication, like opening up. And that is like what's saving my life. It's not like, you know, this profound one day where I just changed forever. It's just the simple things that I've learned how to do differently.